The snowstorm came 3 days ago. It wasn't supposed to last this long, but the weather reports were dead wrong. I'm sitting in my cabin, deep in the northern woods of Maine, watching the snow pile up higher and higher against the windows. It swallowed the porch and the shed out back. The world outside is silent, heavy with white suffocation. I came here to be alone, to clear my head. My wife, Sarah, had taken our daughter, Lily, to visit her parents for the week. I told them I'd join them later, once I finished some writing. The cabin, built by my grandfather, was supposed to be a place of peace, a retreat. Instead, it's become a prison. The cabin itself is old, but sturdy. The floors creak with every step, and the walls carry the faint smell of cedar and smoke. It's the kind of place that feels alive, as though it has a memory of all who've ever stayed here. A stone fireplace dominates the living room, where a fire crackles weakly. The woodpile is running low, and I don't dare venture outside for more. The windows are frosted over, their glass trembling under the relentless wind. I always loved the isolation of this place. No neighbors for miles, no cell service. Just the hum of the generator, the occasional howl of wolves in the distance, and the endless expanse of forest. But now, the isolation feels wrong. It started as a gentle snowfall, the kind that turns the world soft and quiet. I'd spent the afternoon working on my manuscript, the silence a balm to my frazzled nerves. But by nightfall, the wind had picked up, and the snow was coming down in sheets. I didn't think much of it at first. This was Maine, after all. Harsh winters were part of life here. I threw another log on the fire and went to bed, lulled by the rhythmic tapping of snow against the windows. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. The house was dark, darker than it should have been. The generator had died. The silence was oppressive, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every sound. That's when I heard it, a faint tapping. Not on the window, but on the door. I froze in bed, my breath fogging in the icy air. No one should have been out there. The nearest town was over 20 miles away, and the storm was too brutal for anyone to be wandering around. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was soft, almost polite, like whoever or whatever it was didn't want to disturb me too much. I forced myself out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand, and crept to the door. The beam of light quivered as my hand shook. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the wind. No answer. I unlocked the door, just enough to peek through the crack. The porch was empty, the snow untouched. The wind howled, carrying with it an eerie sense of desolation. I slammed the door shut and locked it again, my heart pounding. By morning, the storm had worsened. The snow had buried the bottom half of the windows, and the wind screeched like a living thing. I tried to focus on my writing, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the sound from the night before. Around noon, I decided to check the generator. I bundled up in layers, pulling on boots and gloves, and braced myself against the storm as I stepped outside. The cold was a living thing, biting and clawing at every inch of exposed skin. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They started at the edge of the woods, leading straight to my front door and then away again. The tracks were deep, the snow around them undisturbed. Whatever had made them was barefoot. I followed the tracks as far as I could, but they disappeared into the trees. My mind raced with explanations. A hiker? A hunter? Someone lost in the storm? But none of those made sense. No one would have been out here without shoes. As I turned back toward the cabin, I felt it. Eyes. Someone or something was watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I bolted back inside, slamming the door behind me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, clutching the rifle my grandfather had left behind, and listened. The wind howled, but beneath it, I heard something else. Scratching. It started at the back door, then moved to the windows. A slow, deliberate sound, like nails dragging across wood. By the third day, the food was running low, and the storm showed no signs of letting up. The scratching had stopped sometime before dawn, but the sense of unease hadn't. I decided to distract myself with chores. The woodpile was dwindling, and I needed to ration what I had left. As I stood by the fireplace stacking the last few logs, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time it came from the window. I turned slowly, my blood turning to ice. There, pressed against the frosted glass, was a face, pale and thin, with hollow eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Its mouth was open, lips stretched impossibly wide, as though it were screaming, but no sound came out. I stumbled back, knocking over the stack of logs. When I looked again, the face was gone. I don't remember grabbing the rifle, but I had it in my hands as I flung the door open. "Who's out there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The snow was falling harder now, the world a white void. But there, at the edge of the woods, I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. It tilted its head, as though studying me, then vanished into the trees. I slammed the door shut and locked it, every nerve in my body screaming. That night, the cabin was alive with sound. The walls groaned, the floorboards creaked, and the tapping returned, this time from every window and door. I don't know how much longer I can last. The storm isn't letting up, and the woodpile is almost gone. Last night I heard it again. My daughter's voice. "Daddy, let me in." It came from outside, faint and pleading. But I know it wasn't her. It's still out there, watching, waiting. The storm won't stop, and neither will it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her. Lily's voice. "Daddy, it's cold out here. Please open the door." It wasn't her. It couldn't be. She was safe, hundreds of miles away with Sarah. But the voice, it was so convincing. The way she said "Daddy," the lilt, the softness, it was exactly how she sounded. I stayed by the fire, the rifle across my lap, and tried to convince myself it was just the wind playing tricks. The storm had turned my mind against me, that's all. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. By morning, the tapping stopped, but the snow hadn't. It was piled so high against the windows that barely any light filtered in. The house felt like it was being swallowed whole. I rationed what was left of the food, a can of beans and a few crackers. As I ate, I felt a familiar sense of dread creeping in. Something wasn't right. The air in the cabin was different, heavier, colder. It smelled faintly of wet earth, like a graveyard after rain. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from above. Slow, deliberate creaks, as if someone was walking across the attic floor. The thing is, there is no attic. I stared at the ceiling, my pulse thundering in my ears. The footsteps continued, moving from one end of the cabin to the other. I gripped the rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white. "You're not real," I whispered to myself. "You're not real." But the sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped directly above me. The ceiling groaned, as though under the weight of something heavy. Dust drifted down, settling in the firelight. I couldn't breathe. Then, suddenly, silence. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the ceiling. Minutes? Hours? But when I finally moved, I felt like I was in a dream, like the cabin wasn't entirely real anymore. I decided to check the bedroom. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd find some explanation, something that would make sense of the madness. The hallway was dark, the flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. As I approached the bedroom door, I noticed it was slightly ajar. The air was colder here, biting and raw. I pushed the door open. The bedroom was empty, just as I'd left it. The bed was unmade, my clothes still in a pile on the floor. But something caught my eye, something that made my stomach lurch. The walls. They were covered in writing. Words, carved deep into the wood, overlapping in chaotic spirals. I stepped closer, my hands shaking as I read them. "Let Emmy in. So cold. Daddy, please." The words repeated over and over, carved with such force that splinters littered the floor. And at the center of it all, above the bed, was a single phrase that stopped me cold. "You can't hide forever." I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the bed. My flashlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The footsteps started again. This time they were coming down the hallway. I ran. I don't know why I thought the basement would be safer. It was the only place in the cabin I hadn't checked, the only place I hadn't heard anything. The door was heavy, its hinges groaning as I pulled it open. The air that greeted me was damp and stale, like the breath of something ancient. I descended the wooden stairs, the rifle slung over my shoulder, and reached the bottom. The flashlight beam swept across the room, revealing old storage boxes and cobweb-covered shelves. At first it seemed empty, but then I saw it. In the far corner of the basement, where the shadows were deepest, something moved. It was hunched over, its back to me. Its limbs were impossibly long, its fingers dragging against the concrete floor. Its skin was pale and stretched tight, like it had been starved for centuries. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The thing began to turn, its movements slow and deliberate. As it did, I caught a glimpse of its face, or what was left of it. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. And then it spoke. "You should have opened the door." Its voice wasn't its own. It was Sarah's. I don't remember pulling the trigger, but the rifle went off. The sound was deafening, the recoil slamming into my shoulder. The thing didn't flinch. It lunged toward me, faster than anything that size should have been able to move. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would explode. The basement door slammed shut behind me, but I didn't stop. I ran to the living room, threw more logs onto the fire, and barricaded myself in. The tapping started again. This time it was everywhere, at the windows, the doors, even the walls. And beneath it, I heard the voice. "Daddy, let me in. It's so cold. I'm running out of time. The storm hasn't stopped. The food is gone. The fire is dying, and the thing outside, it's getting bolder. I've seen it through the windows, its hollow eyes watching me. Sometimes it looks like Sarah. Sometimes it looks like Lily. But it's not them. It's waiting for me to let it in. And I'm afraid I won't have a choice." The tapping has stopped. The house is silent again. But it's not the kind of silence I trust. It feels expectant. I think it's inside now. I can hear the floorboards creaking. It's only a matter of time. If anyone finds this, please don't come here. Don't look for me. Some doors are meant to stay closed,